On May 2, 2026, Reuters journalists stood on Philippine soil and watched as U.S. Marines unloaded an anti-ship missile system from a C-130 transport aircraft onto a runway in Basco, the capital of Batanes province. The weapon, called Nemesis, can destroy ships at sea from 115 miles away. It was now sitting on a tiny, wind-beaten island chain with around 20,000 residents, roughly 100 miles south of Taiwan. This was not the first time. It was the second year in a row that these missiles had been airlifted here, and standing nearby, Chinese warships were watching again. The world's two most powerful militaries are now circling a quiet Philippine island chain that most people couldn't find on a map 2 years ago. Most people think of the South China Sea when they hear about China and the Philippines. Scarborough Shoal, Second Thomas Shoal, water cannons and fishing boats. But there is another body of water that matters far more to China's military planners. It is called the Bashi Channel. The Bashi Channel is a 100 nautical mile wide strip of ocean sitting between the Batanes Islands and Taiwan. It is the only deep water passage from the South China Sea into the open Western Pacific. For China's Navy submarines, aircraft carriers, destroyers, this channel is the door to the Pacific Ocean. If it is closed, China is trapped. The invasion of Taiwan is almost impossible if you don't control the northern Philippines. That statement was not political theater. It was military reality. The Bashi Channel is the geographic choke point that controls everything. Whoever dominates the waters around Batanes controls access to the largest ocean on Earth. China's Type 055 guided missile destroyer, the Liaoning aircraft carrier, its nuclear-powered submarines, they all depend on this channel. The CSIS First Island Chain strategy identifies the Bashi Channel as one of the two most critical maritime choke points in all of Asia, alongside the Taiwan Strait itself. This seems like a logical expansion of the MCAs to the northern approaches to the Philippines. For most of its history, Batanes was famous for stone houses and rolling green hills. It was one of the least visited, least talked about provinces in the Philippines. The 20,000 Ivatan people who live there are among the hardiest Filipinos alive. Their ancestors built their homes out of coral stone, specifically to survive the violent typhoons that batter the islands every year. But in 2022, something shifted. President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. came to power and said, openly, what no Philippine president had said before. Taiwan was a Philippine security problem. His national security policy for 2023 to 2028 stated it plainly. Any military conflict in the Taiwan Strait would inevitably affect the Philippines. After that, Batanes stopped being forgotten. A Philippine Marine Brigade deployed to the region in 2022. Joint US-Philippine drills began. Anti-ship missiles arrived. Then, on August 28, 2025, the Philippine Armed Forces inaugurated the Forward Operating Base in Mahatao, Batan Island, the biggest single military investment the AFP had ever made in the Batanes Island chain. It closes the gaps on national security against frequent incursions of foreign aggressors. Batanes is a frontline province just below Taiwan. The base was not a symbolic gesture. It was a direct response to something that had already been happening offshore. On the evening of August 7, 2025, two China Coast Guard vessels, CCG-3301 and CCG-3304, were detected inside Philippine waters near Mavulis Island, the Philippines' northernmost point, sitting at the very top of the Bashi Channel. Philippine Navy patrol vessels BRP Jose Rizal and BRP Emilio Jacinto issued radio challenge after radio challenge. The Chinese ships did not respond. They stayed for 3 hours, until 11 p.m., before finally leaving after the Philippine ships maintained what the Navy described as assertive presence. 3 days later, the Mahatao base was announced. But the ships were not the only concern. On August 3, 2025, the Philippine Coast Guard spotted a Chinese research vessel, the Xiangyang Hong 05, just 15 nautical miles off the Batanes coast during a routine aerial patrol. It had already been tracked inside Philippine waters twice before that same summer, on June 7th and July 31st. It never answered radio calls. By September 2025, Newsweek had obtained satellite photos showing 3 large Chinese Coast Guard vessels encircling the Batanes island group. Analysts who track Chinese maritime behavior recognized it immediately. It was the same slow normalization pattern China used to gradually take control of Scarborough Shoal in 2012, starting with Coast Guard vessels refusing to communicate, lingering until the presence felt routine. The 41st iteration of Balikatan, held April 20th to May 8th, 2026, wasn't like any before it. For the first time, the U.S. Marine Corps' 3rd Marine Littoral Regiment, a unit specifically designed to fight in island chains, spread personnel across 17 locations in the Philippines simultaneously. They used U.S. Air Force C-130s and Army landing craft to insert both Nemesis anti-ship missile systems and HIMARS rocket artillery launchers onto 3 separate islands in the Batanes group. The Nemesis, with its 185-kilometer strike range, was positioned in Basco on Batan Island. A HIMARS launcher, capable of firing anti-ship ballistic missiles at ranges of up to 310 miles, was inserted into Itbayat. Together, these 2 systems could cover every inch of the Luzon Strait and threaten any vessel approaching from the South China Sea. Missiles supported by these launchers can reach targets at ranges between 115 to 310 miles, effectively covering the maritime areas from Luzon to the southern tip of Taiwan. China watched and answered. On April 24, 2026, 4 days into Balikatan, the PLA Southern Theater Command confirmed that a naval fleet led by the Type 055 guided missile destroyer Zunyi had conducted live-fire drills and joint air-sea exercises in waters east of Luzon. The PLA described the action as a necessary response to the current regional situation. Then, days later, Beijing released footage of its warships firing YJ-20 hypersonic missiles, some of the most advanced anti-ship weapons in the world. The timing was not accidental. China stages Navy drill as US and Philippines embark on Balikatan 2026. Meanwhile, China's Liaoning aircraft carrier transited through the Taiwan Strait on April 20th. The diplomat described the simultaneous movements as a tactical envelopment rehearsal, Chinese forces practicing how to place pressure on the Philippines and Taiwan at the same time. Something else happened at Balikatan 2026 that deserves more attention than it received. For the first time in modern history, Japanese combat forces participated directly in military exercises on Philippine soil in the same operational framework as US and Philippine forces, practicing island defense near the Taiwan Strait. This is a historic shift. Japan spent decades after World War II under a pacifist constitution that prohibited overseas military action. That era is ending. On February 26, 2026, Philippine Air Force FA-50 fighter jets flew alongside Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force P-3 Orion maritime patrol aircraft in joint exercises directly over the Bashi Channel. Philippine Navy Commander Jennifer Monforte said Chinese ships tracked the exercise the entire way, following Philippine assets all the way to Batanes. "When we hold exercises and they follow us, for me, that's not normal," she said. The CNAS think tank in Washington went further in March 2026, recommending that the U.S. permanently deploy medium and long-range precision fires at EDCA sites in northern Luzon and in Batanes, subject to Philippine approval. The United States should permanently deploy a mix of ground-based medium and long-range precision fires at EDCA sites in northern Luzon and in Batanes. 3 missile systems are now layered across the northern Philippines. The Philippine military's own BrahMos supersonic cruise missiles deployed in Basco, USN MESIS launchers, and US HIMARS rocket systems. For the first time in history, a multi-nation land-based anti-ship missile network covering the entire Luzon Strait is operational, even if temporarily, on Philippine territory. All of this military activity costs money, and in December 2025, the United States made its most concrete financial commitment to Philippine security in decades. President Donald Trump signed the Philippine Enhanced Resilience Act as part of the 2026 National Defense Authorization Act. The law authorizes up to $500 million per year in foreign military financing for the Philippines, from 2026 through 2030, a total of $2.5 billion. The Philippines is a key ally of the United States, and we must strengthen cooperation with our partners across the region to counter China's aggression. PERA prioritizes exactly what the Philippines lacks most: coastal defense systems, long-range fires, integrated air defense, maritime domain awareness, and drone capabilities. In 2026 alone, an additional $144 million was appropriated specifically for EDCA site upgrades, including in northern Luzon. USNI News described PERA as Washington's most intensive defense investment in the Philippines since the Cold War. Here's a point that gets lost in most coverage. The South China Sea dispute involves multiple countries. Vietnam, Malaysia, Brunei, Taiwan, and China all have overlapping claims to various reefs, shoals, and islands. It is complicated. It is messy. There are many voices.
Batanes is different. There are no overlapping claims. No other country argues that the Batanes Islands belong to anyone but the Philippines. This is undisputed Philippine sovereign territory, recognized by every country on Earth except, potentially, the country that is now sending its warships there. That means any Chinese challenge to Philippine administration in Batanes is not a maritime dispute. It is a direct challenge to the sovereign territory of a country with a mutual defense treaty with the United States. It is a different kind of confrontation entirely. It is also worth noting that Batanes is now part of an interlocking defense architecture. The Philippines has BrahMos missiles in Basco. Japan has Type 88 anti-ship missiles on the islands of Miyako and Yonaguni. Taiwan has Xiangfeng missiles. Together, they form what analysts describe as a north-to-south missile barrier along the first island chain, a wall of land-based anti-ship weapons that any Chinese fleet would have to survive before reaching open water. Beyond the missiles and the warships and the strategic analysis, there are 20,000 people living in the middle of all of this. When local restaurant owner Jinky Cabardo's province ran out of rice in April 2023, partly because supply chains were disrupted by military buildup talk, she understood something visceral about what the strategic calculations meant for ordinary lives. When former Budget Secretary Florencio Abad, a member of one of Batanes' most prominent families, looked out from his hilltop home with sweeping views of the Pacific Ocean, his mind went to World War II. The last time great powers fought near these islands, the last time the Ivatan people were caught between forces larger than anything their stone houses could resist. "I was concerned that history will repeat itself," he said quietly. The people of Batanes are some of the most resilient in the Philippines. Their homes were built for typhoons. Their culture is one of endurance. Now they are being asked to be something more, the Philippines' first line of defense. They did not choose this. Geography chose it for them. The facts from 2025 and 2026 tell a clear story. Batanes is no longer a forgotten province. It is a front line. The question is whether the Philippines and its allies are moving fast enough. The forward operating base in Mahatao is new and still developing. Maritime surveillance gaps remain in the northern EEZ, where Chinese research vessels operated freely through the summer of 2025 before anyone intercepted them. The planned port expansion in Batanes, reported in progress as of 2024, needs to be completed to handle the larger military vessels the base will require. The Diplomat, in a June 2026 analysis, noted that the Philippines still faces an enormous military imbalance with China. Beijing's forces include hundreds of paramilitary Coast Guard and maritime militia vessels, vast arsenals of cruise, ballistic, and hypersonic missiles, and a navy that has grown faster than any in history. The Philippines is catching up, but it is catching up from far behind. With an overmatch this severe in peacetime, it is hard to emphasize how drastic the situation could be in wartime. What gives the Philippines a genuine strategic chance is not matching China one ship at a time. It is the alliance architecture being built right now. The U.S. 3rd Marine Littoral Regiment, specifically designed for exactly this kind of island chain warfare, has now rehearsed deployment to 3 separate Batanes islands. Japan is flying missions over the Bashi Channel. $2.5 billion in U.S. funding is legally committed. The message being sent to Beijing is this: taking Batanes would not be easy. It would mean war with the Philippines, with the United States, and with Japan all at the same time, on terrain that is now armed and watched. Here is the simplest way to understand why Batanes matters to you, wherever you are reading this. The Bashi Channel carries roughly 40% of China's overseas trade. It is the route through which oil from the Middle East reaches East Asia. It is the waterway through which Japanese and South Korean exports reach global markets. It is the passage that connects the South China Sea, one of the busiest shipping lanes on Earth, to the open Pacific. If conflict comes to these waters, global trade does not continue normally. Energy prices rise, supply chains break, economies slow. And right now, a chain of emerald green islands with 20,000 people 100 miles south of Taiwan is sitting at the very center of that possibility. Batanes is not a distant military footnote. It is a front line. And what is being built there, or left unbuilt, will matter to everyone.
Some of China's artificial islands in the West Philippine Sea fired flares several times, just as the Philippine Coast Guard kept a close eye from the sky.
Thank you, sir.
The plane banked left, and the journalists saw them below. 3 white ships, Chinese Coast Guard, moving slowly through blue-green water, circling the island like wolves circling a campfire. Then the radio crackled, a voice in accented English, calm but firm, telling the pilot to turn around. That this was Chinese waters. That this plane had no right to be here. The pilot kept flying. The island below, a 37-hectare tadpole of sand, coral, and stubborn Filipino life, is called Pagasa. In Tagalog, it means hope. And on April 9th, 2026, the Philippine Coast Guard stood on that island and unveiled something that Beijing will not easily forget. The first dedicated Coast Guard command center in the Spratly Islands. A new headquarters, a new district, a new message. You are not moving us. Every day, our villagers see Chinese Coast Guard and militia ships all around the island. This new Coast Guard District Command is a big morale booster for them. MP Albeda, Vice Mayor, Kalayan. To understand why this matters, you have to understand where Pagasa sits. It is 500 kilometers west of Palawan, the nearest major Philippine island. It is hours away from help. It sits inside a web of overlapping claims from China, Vietnam, Taiwan, Malaysia, and Brunei. And it lies at the heart of the South China Sea, a body of water through which roughly $3 to $5 trillion in trade passes every year. Every container ship from Singapore to Seoul, every oil tanker from the Gulf to Japan, every cargo vessel feeding the factories of East Asia, they all pass through this water. Whoever controls the South China Sea doesn't just control fish or oil. They control the circulatory system of the global economy. China knows this. It has known it for decades, which is why what happened on April 9th, 2026, on that small, warm, coral-fringed island, is not a local story. It is a global one. The new headquarters is the nerve center of a freshly established Coast Guard district, the Coast Guard District Kalayan Island Group. Formerly, this entire 68,000 square kilometer stretch of water was overseen from Palawan, hundreds of kilometers away. That was always a weakness. Beijing strategists noted it. Now, for the first time, there will be a Commodore-level commander on the island itself, a permanently stationed Coast Guard vessel. More response boats, more specialists, more eyes. The plans go further. Manila intends to dredge a deeper port. Currently, personnel have to be ferried ashore by small boats, a vulnerability that made every resupply mission an adventure. The far-flung outposts at Kota Island and Parola Island will see their tiny substations upgraded to full station status. There will be more teachers for the island's school, more doctors, better services for the 400 or so Filipinos, fishermen, their wives, their children, who live on Pagasa and whom China officially describes as illegal settlers. That framing tells you everything about Beijing's worldview. In China's telling, a Filipino child doing homework on an island her family has lived on for decades is committing a violation of sovereignty. A Filipino grandmother growing vegetables in a plot of soil on Pagasa is an act of aggression. Manila has a different word for it. Life. The Philippines is not fighting with warships. It is fighting with Coast Guard vessels, international law, and the quiet, stubborn presence of human beings living ordinary lives in extraordinary places. This base did not appear from nowhere. It is the product of years of pressure, coercion, and calculated harassment that has defined Chinese behavior in these waters. The pattern is familiar by now. Chinese Coast Guard vessels spraying water cannons at Philippine supply boats. Maritime militia ships forming walls across resupply routes. Military-grade lasers pointed at Philippine sailors. The ramming of hulls. The cutting of tow lines. The confiscation of equipment. In 2024, things crossed a new threshold. Chinese vessels rammed Philippine naval boats near Second Thomas Shoal, not once, but repeatedly, while armed Chinese sailors issued direct threats. Navy on Navy. Not Coast Guard, not militia. Uniformed military personnel pointing weapons at Filipino sailors in what Manila considers its own waters. On August 11, 2025, it escalated again. Both the Chinese Navy and the Chinese Coast Guard conducted a coordinated operation near Scarborough Shoal, firing water cannons and executing a joint ramming maneuver against the Philippine Coast Guard vessel Suluan. Two arms of the Chinese state, acting together, attacking a single Philippine ship.
MRRV 9701, we have medical personnel on board.
Throughout 2025, China's maritime militia was more active than at any previous point on record. Satellite imagery showed hundreds of vessels deployed daily near the most sensitive features, almost half of all militia activity concentrated around Mischief Reef and Whitsun Reef, right at the edge of Philippine-occupied territory. And then, there is Antelope Reef. In October 2025, Beijing quietly began dredging at Antelope Reef in the Paracel Islands. By January 2026, satellite images from companies like Planet Labs and Vantor showed something extraordinary. Where there was once barely a sandbar, there was now a growing island. By March 2026, the Asia Maritime Transparency Initiative at CSIS estimated the reclaimed land at roughly 6.11 square kilometers, nearly as large as Mischief Reef, China's current largest outpost in the entire South China Sea. This is the first significant island building China has undertaken since 2017. It comes at a moment when American reconnaissance flights over the South China Sea dropped sharply. From 102 flights between December 2025 and January 2026, down to just 72 in February 2026, as Washington's attention was consumed by the Iran war. China noticed the gap and filled it. A MTI analysis suggests Antelope Reef could eventually host a 2,743-meter runway, similar to the ones already built at Woody Island, Mischief Reef, Subi Reef, and Fiery Cross Reef. Analysts note the lagoon could harbor submarines and large Coast Guard vessels. More than 50 small structures are already visible, along with a helipad, jetties, and the foundations of larger buildings. Beijing's foreign ministry called it routine construction to improve living conditions. The satellite images disagree. Here is where the Philippines has played a clever hand. The new base on Pagasa is not a military installation. It belongs to the Coast Guard, a civilian maritime law enforcement agency. This distinction is not bureaucratic, it is strategic. Under international law, Coast Guard operations sit in a different category from military operations. They are harder to characterize as provocations, harder to justify escalating against, harder to frame as acts of aggression. When China attacks a Philippine Coast Guard vessel, it is attacking a civilian law enforcement ship. When China harasses a Philippine supply mission to a Coast Guard outpost, it is interfering with civilian maritime administration. That framing matters in courts. It matters in press conferences. It matters in the conversations Manila is having with its allies. The Philippines has also been waging what you might call a paper war, a battle of names and maps and administrative facts. Last month, Manila announced plans to rename more than 100 island features in the Spratlys, giving them official Filipino names and formally incorporating them into Philippine administrative geography. China immediately accused Manila of breaking international law and threatened unspecified consequences. But Manila's move is legally shrewd. Every renamed feature, every new administrative district, every census form filled out by a Filipino family on Pagasa is what legal scholars call constructive sovereignty, the accumulation of documentary proof of governance. The Philippines is building a legal record, brick by brick, name by name, census by census. And it is doing it in plain sight. The renaming of reefs, the opening of Coast Guard districts, the filing of school records for island children, these are not symbolic gestures. They are legal arguments, filed in the court of international opinion. the Philippines is not doing this alone. In February 2026, the United States committed an additional $144 million for infrastructure under the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, a deal that gives American forces access to 9 military sites across the Philippines. The National Defense Authorization Act for 2026 authorized up to $2.5 billion in foreign military financing for Manila. Just 5 years ago, had one of the most under-equipped militaries in Southeast Asia. The U.S. is funding and building a boat maintenance facility on Palawan's western coast, just 160 miles east of Second Thomas Shoal, designed to get Philippine vessels back into the water within 15 minutes of an emergency. 15 minutes. That is not a training facility. That is a rapid response infrastructure designed for exactly the kind of sudden escalation that has become a weekly occurrence in these waters. The Typhoon mid-range missile system, deployed to the Philippines in 2024 and again during exercises in 2025, remains a source of open alarm in Beijing. China has publicly called it the start of a regional arms race. The fact that China is alarmed suggests the weapon is doing its job. And then, there is Balikatan 2026. Starting April 20, just 11 days from now, the Philippines and the United States will hold their largest joint military exercise ever. But this year is different. For the first time since the Second World War, Japanese combat troops will set foot on Philippine soil. Not observers, not logistics personnel, combat-capable units of Japan's self-defense forces, carrying weapons, running drills alongside American and Filipino soldiers. 81 years since Imperial Japan occupied the Philippines, Japanese soldiers are returning. This time, they are coming as allies. The symbolism is almost too large to contain. The broader coalition forming around the South China Sea is something Beijing would not have predicted a decade ago.
Reiterated the Philippines and Japan's shared commitment to upholding the rules-based order governed by international law.
Japan finalized a mutual defense agreement with the Philippines in September 2025, the most significant step in Japanese military engagement with Southeast Asia in the post-war era. France has been running joint naval patrols with the U.S. 7th Fleet in the Philippine Sea since 2024, a European power-projecting force into what was once considered an exclusively American lake. Australia has deepened its role in Balikatan exercises. Canada signed a new visiting forces agreement with Manila. Vietnam, meanwhile, no friend of China despite its communist government, has dredged approximately 13.4 square kilometers of coral reef across its own Spratly outpost since 2022, framing the work explicitly as a response to Chinese expansion. One by one, the nations of the Indo-Pacific are choosing sides. Not loudly, not through formal alliances, but through exercises, agreements, port calls, and infrastructure deals. The architecture of deterrence is being built, one bilateral agreement at a time. Beijing has a strategy. It has been consistent, patient, and largely successful for the past 15 years. The gray zone. It means doing things that are aggressive enough to intimidate, but not so aggressive as to trigger a military response. Ramming ships rather than shooting at them. Deploying Coast Guard rather than Navy. Jamming communications rather than destroying equipment. The goal is to exhaust the opponent, change facts on the ground, and establish a new normal, all without crossing the threshold that would activate Article 4 of the U.S.-Philippines Mutual Defense Treaty. For years, it worked. Philippine ships turned back, resupply missions were blocked. Chinese infrastructure on disputed reefs grew. The world watched and took notes and issued statements. But something has shifted. Under President Marcos Jr., the Philippines introduced what it calls the Transparency Initiative, openly documenting every Chinese harassment incident, publishing videos of water cannon attacks, releasing satellite images of Chinese militia ships. Where previous administrations kept incidents quiet to avoid embarrassing Beijing, This one turns every confrontation into international news. It has worked. The footage of Chinese water cannons hitting Philippine supply boats played on television screens around the world. It played in Washington. It played in Tokyo. It played in Brussels. It changed the political calculus for governments that might otherwise have remained neutral. Beijing is now stuck. Its gray zone tactics, which were designed to be deniable, are being documented in high resolution and broadcast globally. Every escalation it undertakes now costs more diplomatically than it gains strategically. Three futures are possible. None of them are comfortable. The first is managed tension. The new Coast Guard base becomes normalized. China protests, postures, sends ships to circle the island. Manila ignores the warnings and keeps building. The standoff continues, dangerous, tense, but controlled. This has been the pattern for years. It may continue. The second is a Chinese countermove. Beijing responds to the new base with something of its own, a new installation on a nearby feature, an expanded militia presence, a systematic blockade of Pagasa's resupply routes. This would force Manila to choose, back down, or escalate. It would force Washington to choose, honor the Mutual Defense Treaty, or not. The third is miscalculation, a collision, an injury, a death. Neither side intends a war, but intentions are not always enough. The South China Sea is a crowded space full of fast-moving vessels, charged atmospheres, and commanders making split-second decisions with inadequate communication. One mistake, one ship that turns the wrong way, one sailor who opens fire when he shouldn't, and the treaty gets invoked. The region holds its breath. The world holds its breath. That is the most dangerous scenario of all. A China that decides time is running out. The most dangerous moment in any arms race is not when one side is stronger. It is when one side feels it is about to lose its advantage. Come back to the image at the beginning. A journalist on a plane. Chinese ships below. A radio warning in English. The pilot keeping course. The Philippines opened a Coast Guard base anyway. On 37 hectares of sand and coral and stubbornness, somewhere between the Philippines and Vietnam and China and the deep blue sea, 400 people wake up every morning and go about their lives. They fish. They teach their children. They grow food in small garden plots. They watch Chinese ships from their windows. And now, a Commodore of the Philippine Coast Guard sits in a new command center on that island, with a permanently stationed ship in the harbor and a mandate that could not be clearer. The defense of the Calayan Island Group is a top priority. There are bigger things happening in the world right now. A war in the Middle East. Trade wars reshaping global supply chains. The great power competition playing out across technology, finance, and politics. It is easy to overlook a tiny island in the South China Sea. What happens on Pagasa Island is a test of something that matters far beyond its 37 hectares. It is a test of whether a small nation can use international law, civilian institutions, strategic alliances, and sheer human presence to hold its own against a country 30 times its size. It is a test of whether the rules-based international order, the system of laws and norms that has governed the seas since 1945, still means anything in the Indo-Pacific. It is a test of whether might makes right. The answer the Philippines gave today, on April 9, 2026, with a Coast Guard activation ceremony on a remote island that China says doesn't belong to it, was this: not yet. Not here. Not us. The island is small. The question it poses is enormous. And the answer to that question will define the Indo-Pacific and quite possibly the world for the next generation.
Offend talaga yung mga Chinese radio challenges. Pero sapat na sinasagot ng Coast Guard sa iba't ibang features dito sa West Philippine Sea at mula din dito sa eroplano natin. Laging iginigiit yung UN Convention on the Law of the Sea at saka yung 2016 Arbitral Award kung kaya't
She stood on a small wind-beaten island in the middle of contested waters and said it plainly: we must assert our sovereign rights consistently and without fear. Risa Hontiveros. That wasn't a speech delivered in an air-conditioned hall in Manila. It was delivered on Pag-asa Island itself. And that detail matters. Because when a senator flies out to the largest Philippine-occupied feature in the Spratlys and calls for continuous diplomatic, political, and military pushback, it's not just rhetoric. It's positioning. It's signaling. It's domestic politics meeting frontline geography. And you can feel the shift. Pag-asa is not symbolic in the abstract. It's inhabited. It has a runway, a small civilian community, municipal officials, fisherfolk. It sits in waters that carry roughly $3 to $3.5 trillion in global trade every year. Around 30% of global maritime commerce flows through the South China Sea. Energy shipments, supply chains, the quiet machinery of globalization. That scale changes how you look at one island. If nearly a third of global maritime trade passes nearby, then control, access, and presence in these waters aren't local issues. They're systemic ones. And here's the hard truth. The Philippines already won the legal argument. In 2016, the ruling issued by the Permanent Court of Arbitration invalidated China's sweeping 9-line claim and affirmed Manila's maritime entitlements under UNCLOS. On paper, that was decisive. But paper doesn't patrol sea lanes. Despite the ruling, Chinese Coast Guard and maritime militia activity has continued in contested areas, including near Philippine-occupied features and resupply routes. The friction hasn't stopped. It's normalized. That's why Hontiveros' visit lands differently. She's not just invoking sovereignty in theory. She's responding to a sustained pattern of gray zone pressure, water cannons, blocking maneuvers, shadowing at sea. The message from her side is clear. Passive endurance is no longer enough. There needs to be consistent pushback, diplomatically, politically, and yes, militarily. She also emphasized strengthening defense cooperation with the United States and other like-minded nations. That's not subtle. It signals alignment. It signals willingness to lean into partnerships rather than hedge. And this is where the moment becomes critical. Because this isn't a fresh legal dispute. That chapter was written in 2016.
Offend talaga yung mga Chinese radio challenges. Pero sapat na sinasagot ng Coast Guard sa iba't ibang features dito sa West Philippine Sea at mula din dito sa eroplano natin. Laging iginigiit yung UN Convention on the Law of the Sea at saka yung 2016 Arbitral Award kung kaya't
This is a strategic contest unfolding in slow motion. A battle of presence, of persistence, of who shows up tomorrow, and the day after, and the year after that. When a sitting senator goes to Pag-asa and calls for stronger defense measures, it reflects something deeper, growing impatience within parts of the Philippine political establishment. The debate has shifted from are we legally right to are we operationally secure? That's a different question. And once a country starts asking that, the strategic temperature rises, even if no one fires a shot. If you zoom out on a map, Pag-asa looks tiny, almost forgettable, just a speck in blue water. But geopolitics has this strange habit. The smallest dots sometimes carry the heaviest weight. Pag-asa, internationally known as Thitu Island, is the largest Philippine-occupied feature in the Spratly Islands. It sits roughly 480 kilometers west of Palawan, isolated but not insignificant. On paper, it has a 1,300-meter airstrip. In reality, it has something far more powerful: permanence. Around 200 civilians live there. Families, local officials, teachers, fisherfolk. Kids who grow up knowing that the horizon around them is politically sensitive. That detail matters more than people realize. Because unlike many outposts in the South China Sea, Pag-asa isn't just a military foothold. It's a functioning civilian community. There's a town hall, there's governance, there's daily life. That strengthens Manila's legal and political claim in a way that concrete alone cannot. Under international law, civilian administration carries weight. It signals effective occupation, not just symbolic control. And in territorial disputes, symbolism backed by people is stronger than symbolism backed by empty structures. Geographically, the island is positioned in a way that amplifies its value. From Pag-asa, surveillance coverage extends across key maritime routes. Aircraft operating from its airstrip can monitor surrounding waters. Coast Guard vessels have a staging point. Logistics chains shorten. Awareness improves. Now look at what surrounds it. Nearby features like Subi Reef and Mischief Reef have been transformed into heavily developed artificial island bases. Long runways, radar systems, hardened structures. Those installations dramatically expanded China's operational reach in the area. Pag-asa sits within that environment, which is why control of the island isn't about prestige. It's about staying visible in a crowded, militarized space. Presence is the currency here. You can win arguments in court, and the Philippines did in 2016. But presence determines who shapes daily reality, who patrols, who documents, who responds first, who stays. Pag-asa gives Manila a foothold in a region where footholds are scarce and contested. It anchors Philippine visibility in waters that carry roughly a third of global maritime trade. And it reminds everyone watching that sovereignty isn't just declared, it's lived. In maritime disputes, absence creates vacuum, and vacuums get filled. Pag-asa prevents that vacuum. That's why it matters. Let's zoom out for a second, because you can't understand why Pag-asa feels tense right now without understanding the scale of what surrounds it. China claims nearly 90% of the South China Sea under what's known as the 9-dash line. It's a sweeping maritime boundary that cuts deep into waters also claimed by Southeast Asian states. In 2016, the Permanent Court of Arbitration ruled that China's historic rights argument had no legal basis under UNCLOS. It also determined that features like Mischief Reef are legally low tide elevations, meaning they cannot generate sovereign territorial seas of their own. On legal grounds, the ruling was decisive. Beijing rejected it outright. And that's where law and power part ways. Since 2013, China has reclaimed more than 3,200 acres of land across the Spratly Islands. What were once submerged features or small reefs are now large artificial islands with military-grade infrastructure. Runways exceeding 3,000 meters were built on major features like Fiery Cross Reef and Subi Reef. That length matters. It allows fighter aircraft, heavy transports, and surveillance planes to operate far from mainland bases. Radar arrays, missile systems, hardened shelters, deep water ports. These installations extend China's anti-access/area denial (A2AD) envelope deep into Southeast Asia. Aircraft range expands. Sensor coverage stretches. Reaction times shorten. This isn't a theoretical capability. It's embedded infrastructure. And infrastructure doesn't blink. But here's the thing. None of this has unfolded as open warfare. Instead, Beijing has leaned heavily on gray zone tactics. maritime militia swarms, Coast Guard shadowing, high-pressure water cannons, laser incidents targeting bridge crews, blocking maneuvers during resupply missions. You've seen the footage. In 2023 and 2024, Philippine supply boats heading to Second Thomas Shoal were repeatedly confronted by Chinese Coast Guard vessels. Water cannons at close range. Dangerous maneuvers. Slow-motion brinkmanship designed to intimidate without crossing the threshold into armed conflict. This is pressure without war. It's calibrated. It's undeniable. It stays just below the line that would trigger collective defense obligations, but it steadily tests resolve. And that's what makes it exhausting. No single incident is catastrophic. But the accumulation shifts the operational environment. It normalizes friction. It forces Manila to respond again and again, often under public scrutiny. So when a Philippine senator calls for stronger defense on Pag-asa, it's not happening in isolation. It's happening against a backdrop of expanded airfields, reclaimed land, layered sensors, and relentless gray zone pressure. The legal debate may be settled in The Hague. The strategic contest is unfolding on the water, every single week. When Senator Risa Hontiveros speaks about Pag-asa, she isn't just reacting to headlines. She's laying out a blueprint for how the Philippines can operate in contested waters, a framework that combines diplomacy, alliances, and defense upgrades. At its core, Hontiveros' approach is about refusing to let pressure become normal. She advocates filing diplomatic protests consistently, amplifying incidents internationally, and repeatedly reaffirming the 2016 arbitral ruling. The logic is simple. If coercive actions are allowed to fade into routine, sovereignty erodes not in a single dramatic event, but quietly over time. It's a doctrine of normalization resistance, a reminder that sometimes staying present is more important than striking back. Concrete and statements, side by side, reinforce one another. Hontiveros also emphasizes partnerships. Under President Ferdinand Marcos Jr., Manila has expanded security cooperation significantly. The EDCA framework has increased access for U.S. forces. Joint maritime patrols were conducted in 2023 and 2024, and coordination with Japan and Australia is deepening. The annual Balikatan exercises now involve over 17,000 troops, making them the largest in history. That sends a clear signal. Deterrence is no longer just national, it's multilateral. Presence is multiplied by allies, and gray zone pressure becomes riskier when confronted by visible coalitions. Hontiveros' framework also ties closely to tangible military capabilities. The Armed Forces of the Philippines is advancing its revised AFP modernization program, prioritizing anti-ship missile systems, coastal radar networks, new patrol vessels, and fighter aircraft procurement. The 2024 defense budget exceeded $280 billion, roughly $5 billion, its largest to date. Modest compared to China's $225+ billion annual spending, yes, but the political significance is huge. Every peso spent strengthens Manila's ability to sustain presence, respond quickly, and operate credibly in contested waters. The framework is clear: resist normalization, deepen alliances, and modernize defense. It's a three-pronged approach designed not for immediate confrontation, but for strategic endurance. In the South China Sea, that endurance is often the decisive factor. You can't talk about Pag-asa without looking at the Philippine home front. Because public sentiment and politics shape strategy almost as much as geography does. Recent surveys show a clear trend. Most Filipinos distrust China and back stronger defense of maritime rights. These are not abstract numbers. Social media amplifies every maritime incident: Coast Guard confrontations, water cannon standoffs, resupply missions. Clips go viral. Comment threads flare. Each event reinforces a sense that defending the country's claims isn't optional, it's urgent. Public pressure matters. Politicians notice when videos of tension in the South China Sea dominate feeds. It creates both political incentive and strategic urgency to act. Under President Ferdinand Marcos Jr., Manila has pivoted toward a firmer stance. Security cooperation with Washington has been reopened and expanded, signaling alignment with a longtime ally. Confrontations are now publicized more aggressively, and the administration's diplomatic tone has hardened. This marks a contrast with previous periods of softer engagement, when Manila often prioritized quiet diplomacy and risk mitigation over visibility. Today, the message is clear. Philippine sovereignty will be defended openly, and deterrence is not merely symbolic. In short, domestic politics, public sentiment, and leadership choices converge. The result, a Philippine posture that increasingly matches the operational reality on the ground, or rather, on the water, near Pag-asa. When you talk about Pag-asa, it's not about imagining full-scale war. The real danger lies in miscoordination, misjudgment, and miscalculation, small incidents that spiral. Close encounters at sea are almost routine now, but routine doesn't mean safe. Collisions between vessels, accidental injuries to personnel, or even misinterpreted maneuvers can quickly trigger diplomatic tension. A water cannon today is just that. Tomorrow, it could escalate into a serious confrontation. The South China Sea is a pressure cooker. Every patrol, resupply, and gray zone maneuver adds fuel. And in a contested maritime space where multiple actors operate in close proximity, friction is inevitable. Adding another layer, the 1951 Mutual Defense Treaty between the Philippines and the United States explicitly covers armed attacks on Philippine public vessels in the Pacific. U.S. officials have repeatedly confirmed that this extends to the South China Sea. That means stakes are higher than just Manila versus Beijing. Any incident involving Philippine ships could activate broader obligations, drawing in a major power with global reach. The combination of routine gray zone pressure and alliance commitments makes the operational environment around Pag-asa sensitive, a place where even minor miscalculations carry strategic weight. It's a chessboard where every move must be measured, because the consequences can escalate far faster than any single actor expects. Pag-asa isn't just about one small island or a bilateral tiff between Manila and Beijing. It sits at the heart of something much larger. The South China Sea is a core artery of Indo-Pacific trade, carrying trillions of dollars in energy, goods, and commodities. It's a fisheries hub sustaining millions of livelihoods across Southeast Asia. And it's a proving ground for international law, where rulings like the 2016 arbitral decision are tested not in courtrooms, but on the water. If coercion goes unchecked, the precedent spreads. Other states may be tempted to push the limits of law and custom. If deterrence holds, regional stability strengthens. Every maneuver, patrol, and upgrade sends a message far beyond Manila or Beijing. As Manila navigates this increasingly tense environment, a few pressing questions come into focus. Can the Philippines maintain sustained deterrence without provoking economic or diplomatic retaliation from Beijing? The challenge isn't just about presence at sea. It's about balancing assertiveness with the potential costs that come from Beijing's economic leverage and political influence. Another question revolves around alliances. Will partners move beyond symbolic gestures, like joint patrols, toward deeper, more integrated security cooperation? Exercises like Balikatan have grown in scale, but sustained deterrence may require closer operational coordination, intelligence sharing, and real-time logistical support, steps that carry both strategic benefits and political sensitivities. Finally, there's the broader operational reality. Are we entering a prolonged gray zone equilibrium where friction is constant, but outright war is avoided? In this scenario, pressure tactics, harassment, and shows of force become routine tools of influence. PAG-ASA, in this context, isn't just an island. It's a pressure gauge for Southeast Asian sovereignty, measuring how far countries are willing to go to assert their rights while managing risk and avoiding escalation. Senator Risa Hontiveros' call for stronger defenses reflects a larger shift in Philippine strategic thinking. The debate has moved beyond whether to respond to one of how forcefully to defend national interests. PAG-ASA now functions as both a symbol and a frontline. Its significance stretches to alliance credibility, the regional balance of power, and the future of international maritime law. The waters may look calm on the surface, but underneath, the South China Sea is one of the most consequential geopolitical fault lines of our time, and every decision on PAG-ASA ripples far beyond its tiny shores. If you found this analysis valuable, share your perspective in the comments. Your insights help deepen the conversation and sharpen our understanding of evolving regional dynamics. Thank you, and we will see you soon in our next geopolitical discussion.
And to ensure that we are ready for the high-end tactical fight, and if need.
Nothing rolled in with fanfare. No dramatic base openings. No headline-grabbing troop numbers. Just a short confirmation, almost easy to miss. The U.S. Army now maintains a rotational force in the Philippines. Quiet, technical, bureaucratic sounding, and strategically massive. Because this isn't just another exercise cycle. It's a shift in posture. For years, U.S. land power in the Philippines came and went with drills, balikatan, joint training, temporary deployments that packed up and left. What's emerging now is different. Institutionalized rotation, persistent presence without permanent basing, Army units flowing in and out, but never really leaving the chessboard. Low visibility, high consequence. That matters because land forces change the equation. Naval and air power signal reach. Army forces signal intent, staying power, and denial. They're about holding terrain, controlling choke points, and shaping escalation thresholds. In the context of the first island chain, that's not a footnote, it's architecture. This quiet expansion effectively weaves U.S. ground forces into the Philippines' defense landscape, not as guests, but as a recurring feature. It blurs the line between exercise and posture, between presence and permanence. And it does so without triggering the political backlash that large fixed bases once did. The timing isn't accidental. China's military pressure on Taiwan is intensifying. The South China Sea is more militarized than ever. The first island chain, once a conceptual line on a map, is now being physically reinforced, node by node. The Philippines sits at the hinge of that chain. And land power at the hinge changes how deterrence works. So the real question isn't whether this is escalation. It's whether this marks the moment deterrence in Southeast Asia stopped being episodic and started becoming structural. How quiet the U.S. Army rotation reshapes the balance between China, Taiwan, and the South China Sea? And what does it mean when the first island chain stops being theory and starts being staffed? The Army rotational force Philippines is deliberately low profile, but that doesn't make it insignificant. Unlike traditional deployments with parades, press briefings, or unit roll calls, this rotation is framed as a lean, headquarters-level element with supporting forces flowing in and out. On paper, it looks modest, In practice, it establishes a persistent footprint that quietly changes deterrence calculus. Command falls under a lieutenant colonel, led headquarters, signaling that this is a standing leadership node rather than a temporary task force. That level of command is small enough to remain discreet, but senior enough to ensure continuity across rotations. A RFP is embedded within Task Force, Philippines, which allows knowledge, coordination, and operational memory to persist even as personnel rotate. It's a structural presence disguised as a temporary deployment. The force also complements the Marine Rotational Force, Southeast Asia, rather than duplicating it. Where the Marines focus on expeditionary and littoral operations, the Army brings logistical depth, command and control capability, and operational sustainment. This combination strengthens the U.S.-Philippine partnership while keeping the footprint light. A smart mix of presence, capability, and ambiguity. The opacity of ARFP isn't an oversight, it's deliberate. By withholding details on size, equipment, or mission profile, the U.S. leverages uncertainty as a strategic tool. Observers and potential adversaries must assume the force could scale, support contingency operations, or coordinate rapidly with other U.S. rotational elements. In essence, rotational becomes permanent in practice, a quiet signal that U.S. land power is now a recurring feature in the Philippines without provoking overt political friction. Task Force Philippines was officially announced in October 2025 as the organizational spine supporting rotational deployments like ARFP. Its creation wasn't about a flashy troop buildup, it was about structure, planning, and readiness. The task force exists to improve joint operational planning, enable rapid crisis response, and synchronize U.S. Philippine ground operations across a range of contingencies. Strategically, this is a quiet but profound shift. Where alliance coordination used to be episodic and ad hoc, Task Force, Philippines institutionalizes it, creating a standing mechanism for planning, communication, and operational integration. It embeds U.S. land warfare expertise directly into Philippine defense architecture, enhancing interoperability and allowing both nations to respond faster to regional contingencies. The move also sends a subtle but clear signal. The U.S. is committed to the Philippines long term, yet without the political complications of permanent base expansion. By establishing a rotational force within a permanent planning structure, the task force reinforces deterrence, strengthens bilateral ties, and quietly militarizes the first island chain without headlines. The strategic weight of the Philippines isn't abstract, it's geography made manifest. Situated along the first island chain, the archipelago serves as both a forward shield for Taiwan and a southern anchor for maritime denial in the South China Sea. Think of it like Okinawa or Guam, a mix of natural terrain, proximity to contested waters, and lines of communication that make it indispensable for projecting influence and shaping regional calculations. Breaking it down further, certain areas carry outsized importance. Northern Luzon sits directly in the path of any Taiwan contingency spillover, providing early staging, observation, and coordination points. Palawan anchors the southern edge of the South China Sea, a hotspot for territorial disputes and maritime pressure points. Meanwhile, Mindanao offers ISR potential, a legacy of counterinsurgency infrastructure, and the possibility of drone basing, a flexible, persistent surveillance platform that extends reach across the region. In short, the Philippines isn't just another host nation. It's a strategic hinge in the first island chain, one that shapes deterrence, maritime access, and rapid response options for the U.S. while subtly constraining potential adversaries. Geography doesn't change, and that's why presence here carries disproportionate weight. Since 2022, the U.S. has quietly layered advanced Army systems into the Philippines, reshaping what rotational presence actually means. Mobile precision fires like HIMARS bring rapid, long-range strike capability. Patriot air and missile defense adds a protective umbrella against aerial threats. Mid-range strike options, including Typhoon systems with Tomahawk capability, extend deterrence far beyond the shoreline. On the intelligence side, Gray Eagle MQ-9ISR platforms provide persistent surveillance, mapping potential hotspots in real time. This isn't just about hardware. It reflects a doctrinal shift. U.S. Army deployments here are moving from counter-terrorism assistance to state-on-state deterrence. Land forces are now integrated into maritime conflict planning, functioning as a key node in regional defense networks rather than a supporting afterthought. The Army, once secondary to Navy and Air Force operations in the Indo-Pacific, is now a central actor, capable of shaping deterrence, controlling key terrain, and providing options that extend the first island chain's strategic depth. Presence, capability, and integration together mean that the Philippines is no longer just a training ground. It's a forward operating platform for multi-domain deterrence, quietly signaling U.S. resolve while maintaining a low-profile footprint. The presence of U.S. Army rotational forces in the Philippines hasn't gone unnoticed in Beijing. Official statements frame these deployments as destabilizing, painting a narrative that U.S. land power is creeping closer to Taiwan and expanding influence in the South China Sea. Analysts note the linkage between rotational deployments and broader Chinese concerns over maritime security and regional balance. Each missile battery, ISR drone, or HIMARS launcher, may seem small individually, but together they create a strategic picture that complicates Chinese calculations. The effect is deliberate. By quietly embedding capable army units, the U.S. raises the cost of coercion against Manila and forces the PLA to account for scenarios they previously treated as low priority. Operational planning becomes more complex, and the risk of miscalculation rises in any crisis. This is the essence of rotational presence. Low-profile deployment with high strategic leverage, signaling deterrence without overt provocation. Manila's strategic calculus. For the Philippines, the calculus is clear but delicate. Ongoing South China Sea confrontations, the potential spillover from any Taiwan crisis, and the need to protect its exclusive economic zone demand credible deterrence. Rotational U.S. land forces give Manila more than reassurance. They provide a practical ability to project defense and secure key terrain without fully ceding sovereignty. Domestically, the armed forces of the Philippines are making moves of their own. The activation of the first land-based missile battalion reflects growing recognition of integrated territorial defense. Simultaneously, joint exercises and interoperability programs with U.S. forces are institutionalizing skills, command protocols, and rapid response capabilities. Manila's challenge is balancing the benefits of this partnership with sovereignty sensitivities, ensuring that the U.S. presence strengthens rather than politicizes domestic security. Even quiet deployments carry risks. Fixed missile batteries are vulnerable to preemptive strikes or sabotage, and rotational units must navigate sustainment, logistics, and command and control complexities in crisis scenarios. Missteps in coordination or timing could have outsized consequences in a densely militarized maritime theater. Political dynamics add another layer. Public perception of foreign troops on Philippine soil can stir backlash, and ASEAN neighbors may view these moves as militarization of the region, complicating diplomatic balance. Finally, the sheer proximity of forces to sensitive zones in the South China Sea increases the risk of accidental escalation with China if miscommunication occurs. These constraints underline the delicate dance of deterrence. Capability must be credible, yet visible restraint is essential. These developments are reshaping the Indo-Pacific security architecture. The U.S. Army's quiet rotational presence normalizes land power in maritime Asia, moving it from a theoretical option to an operational reality. For the Philippines, this positions the archipelago as a central node in regional deterrence, transforming it from a peripheral ally to a frontline stakeholder. Rotational forces emerge as the preferred model for forward presence, flexible, scalable, and politically manageable, while providing tangible deterrence against coercive actors. Long-term, these deployments ripple across contingency planning for Taiwan and other flashpoints. Even modest formations, quietly deployed, can create strategic effects far larger than their size suggests, shaping adversary calculations, protecting alliance credibility, and embedding the Philippines at the center of U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy. The Army Rotational Force, Philippines signals more than a temporary deployment. It marks enduring U.S. intent. The focus has shifted from symbolic exercises to operational readiness, with forces capable of responding to crises, supporting allies, and deterring aggression. For Manila, the message is clear. The Philippines is no longer a backwater ally. It sits on the front line of a regional balance of power struggle, hosting capabilities that quietly amplify deterrence without provoking overt conflict. In the end, the strategic takeaway is striking. Small formations, discreetly rotated, can have outsized consequences. Presence, integration, and capability combine to create a force multiplier effect, proving that in modern geopolitics, the quietest moves often leave the deepest imprint.
Mavalis Island may be just 1.1 square kilometers in size, but it has become disproportionately important in the Indo-Pacific's shifting strategic landscape. As the Philippines' lone permanent outpost near Taiwan, Mavalis anchors Manila's northern frontier, closer to Taiwan than to its own main island of Luzon, and affirms sovereignty at the country's edge. Geostrategically, it sits astride the Bashi Channel, the critical maritime gateway linking the South China Sea to the Pacific Ocean, a corridor essential both for Chinese naval movements and for global commerce and undersea data cables. Its proximity to Taiwan also gives it a humanitarian dimension, potentially the Philippines' first staging point for the evacuation of nearly 200,000 Filipino workers in Taiwan should conflict erupt. Military planners agree the Bashi Channel could decide the fate of any Taiwan contingency, making Mavalis a decisive node in regional defense.
At present, only a small contingent of Philippine Marines holds the island under Spartan conditions. But even this modest presence carries powerful symbolic weight. Compared to the contested shoals of the West Philippine Sea, Mavulis's waters are calmer. Yet, its location ensures constant surveillance of Chinese naval traffic. American strategists have already incorporated the island into joint exercises and long-term plans, envisioning it as a fortress-like stronghold within the second line of Allied defenses. For its part, Manila is ramping up infrastructure and embedding Mavulis into its comprehensive archipelagic defense concept. Philippine leaders openly admit that a Taiwan crisis would inevitably pull the country in. With threats there intertwined with Chinese aggression in the West Philippine Sea. Japan, Australia, and South Korea have also shown growing interest, embedding Mavulis into a wider minilateral security web, while the Philippines discreetly expands its defense ties with Taiwan itself. Ultimately, Mavulis has shifted from being a neglected rock to the symbolic first frontier of Philippine sovereignty, a sentinel that could shape the course of conflict and cooperation in the Indo-Pacific. Mavulis Island today stands as the Philippines' most remote and northernmost military outpost, a solitary sentinel facing Taiwan across the turbulent waters of the Luzon Strait. Unlike other isolated islands in the Batanes group, Mavulis is not a civilian settlement, but a military installation, home to a permanent detachment of the Philippine Navy and Marines, tasked with safeguarding national sovereignty in one of the world's most geopolitically sensitive choke points. This garrison is more than a token presence. It forms part of the country's Maritime Domain Awareness Network, designed to monitor movements across the Luzon Strait, an area increasingly traversed by Chinese warships, U.S. aircraft, and international commercial shipping. By keeping a military presence here, the Philippines signals its refusal to let its northern frontier become a blind spot in the unfolding U.S.-China rivalry. What makes Mavulis especially significant is not just its role, but its geography. The island is physically closer to Taiwan than to Luzon itself, just 98 kilometers, 61 miles, from Taiwan's Lesser Orchid Island, compared to 288 kilometers from mainland Luzon. This means that any military or humanitarian scenario involving Taiwan inevitably places Mavulis within the operational envelope of regional powers. In practical terms, Philippine troops stationed here sit closer to Taiwanese fishing villages than to their own provincial capitals. An extraordinary reminder of how the Philippines' borders brush directly against the fault lines of East Asia's great power competition.
This island underscores the strategic importance of this detachment. It serves as our watchful sentinel at the northernmost reaches of our maritime borders, ensuring the security and sovereignty of our homeland.
The decision to establish a permanent naval detachment on Mavulis was not made lightly. In October 2023, the Philippines inaugurated a new naval detachment headquarters on the island, solidifying its role as a frontline symbol of sovereignty and territorial integrity. This move was both practical and political. Practical in strengthening surveillance and defense at the nation's edge, and political in affirming to both allies and rivals that Manila intends to exercise full authority over its northernmost territory. For the Philippines, Mavulis is not just an isolated rock. It is a living outpost that connects the country's defense strategy to the broader currents of regional security, and signals its determination to be an active stakeholder in the stability of the Taiwan Strait. Geostrategically, Mavulis Island is perched at the edge of one of the most important maritime corridors in the world, the Bashi Channel. This deepwater passage, part of the wider Luzon Strait, functions as a choke point linking the South China Sea to the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean. For centuries, the waters here have served as a natural gateway for seafarers and traders. But in the 21st century, its significance has grown exponentially, shaping the military strategies of great powers as well as the flows of the global economy. Whoever can monitor, secure, or potentially disrupt this channel exerts outsized influence over both regional stability and international commerce. For the Chinese People's Liberation Army Navy, PLAN, the Bashi Channel is nothing less than a strategic lifeline. Within the confined and closely monitored waters of the South China Sea, Chinese submarines and aircraft carriers are hemmed in by U.S. allies' surveillance networks and anti-submarine warfare assets. But through the Bashi Channel, PLAN vessels can slip into the deeper and more open waters of the Western Pacific, where they can maneuver more freely, test long-range strike capabilities, and threaten U.S. bases on Guam, Japan, and beyond. This is why Chinese naval strategy treats the Luzon Strait not as a peripheral zone, but as a critical exit door from its near seas, one that is increasingly contested by U.S. and allied patrols. The importance of the channel is not limited to military considerations. It is also a vital artery of global commerce. A significant portion of the world's maritime trade passes through this corridor, linking East Asia's industrial hubs with markets in North America and beyond. Equally critical are the undersea communication cables running through the Bashi Channel. These fiber optic lines carry much of Asia's internet and telephone traffic, making them the invisible infrastructure of the digital economy. Disruptions here, whether from natural disasters like earthquakes or deliberate sabotage in a conflict, would ripple across global markets and paralyze essential services. This convergence of military strategy and economic lifelines explains why Mavulis Island, small as it may be, occupies a disproportionately important place in regional geopolitics.
It sits at the threshold of a channel that matters not only to the Philippines and its allies, but to the global system of trade and communication itself.
Mavalis is more than just a military outpost. It could become the Philippines' first humanitarian lifeline in a Taiwan contingency. With nearly 200,000 overseas Filipino workers, OFWs, living in Taiwan, Philippine military leaders have openly acknowledged the island's importance as a staging point for mass evacuation or relief operations. General Romeo Bronner Jr., Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, has directed his troops to prepare specific plans for such contingencies. The Batanes chain, where Mavalis sits, would therefore not only be a strategic military observation post, but also a humanitarian gateway in the event of conflict.
In any Taiwan invasion scenario, the Bashi Channel looms large. US, Japanese, and Filipino military planners agree that this choke point could determine the outcome of a conflict. The prevailing consensus is that Beijing would attempt to blockade or seize control of the channel to isolate Taiwan and prevent US and allied reinforcements from reaching the island. US intelligence assessments, widely reported, note that Xi Jinping has ordered the PLA to be ready by 2027 for a Taiwan contingency. This timeline places growing pressure on Mavalis, elevating its role from a symbolic outpost into a frontline node in an unfolding great power rivalry.
On the ground, however, Mavalis remains a humble installation. The island is staffed by a rotating detachment of around 16 Philippine Marines, sailors, and government personnel. Conditions are Spartan. Infrastructure is minimal, with early facilities like a desalination plant reportedly malfunctioning, leaving troops reliant on regular resupply for drinking water. Still, the presence itself is what matters. The Philippine flag flying over Mavalis signals an active claim of sovereignty and ensures that no foreign navy can treat this northern tip as unoccupied or neglected. The relative calm around Mavalis contrasts sharply with the daily confrontations in the West Philippine Sea. In places like Scarborough Shoal or Second Thomas Shoal, Chinese Coast Guard and militia vessels frequently employ water cannons, lasers, and dangerous ramming to harass Philippine ships. Around Mavalis, Chinese ships are often observed transiting through the Bashi Channel, but direct confrontations remain rare. This is not due to lack of interest, but rather the island's remoteness and the fact that Beijing's provocations are concentrated where resources and sovereignty disputes are most immediate. Still, the quietness is fragile, and it could change rapidly if tensions over Taiwan intensify. American strategists have identified Mavalis as a potential linchpin of future Indo-Pacific operations. In Balikatan 2024, U.S. and Philippine forces conducted exercises in Batanes, practicing key terrain security and the rapid deployment of HIMARS rocket artillery. Discussions are ongoing about further enhancements, including deploying radar systems capable of monitoring vast areas of the Luzon Strait.
From Washington's perspective, Mavalis could serve as a forward tripwire,
a hardened outpost that integrates into a broader defensive chain stretching from Okinawa to Guam. The symbolism of U.S. cooperation in Batanes also signals to Beijing that Manila is not standing alone on its northern frontier. Under its Comprehensive Archipelagic Defense Concept, CADC, the Philippines has begun to prioritize defense across its entire maritime domain. Batanes plays a pivotal role in this new doctrine. In August 2025, a new forward operating base in Mahatao, Batan Island, was activated, serving as a logistics hub for both territorial defense and humanitarian response. Investments in infrastructure, airstrips, communications, and supply depots are transforming the Batanes from an overlooked frontier into a fortified northern shield. Mavalis, though the smallest, represents the cutting edge of this transformation. For Manila, the threats in the Taiwan Strait and the West Philippine Sea are two sides of the same coin. President Marcos Jr. has warned that the Philippines will be dragged into a Taiwan conflict, whether we like it or not, emphasizing that the country cannot separate its geography from its security. The safety of nearly 200,000 OFWs in Taiwan adds an urgent humanitarian dimension. At the same time, aggression in the West Philippine Sea continues to escalate, making it clear to Philippine officials that both theaters must be treated as part of a single, unified defense problem.
The Philippines is not the only country watching Mavulus. Japan has already provided 5 radar systems to enhance Philippine maritime surveillance, while Australia and South Korea have joined U.S.-Philippines exercises in the Batanes. This growing mini-lateral cooperation, often dubbed the Squad, U.S., Japan, Australia, and the Philippines, highlights the island's regional significance. Allied naval drills near Mavulus signal to China that multiple nations have stakes in keeping the Luzon Strait open and secure. Though constrained by the One China policy, Manila has quietly deepened unofficial security ties with Taiwan. Reports point to joint patrols between the Philippine Coast Guard and Taiwanese counterparts in the Bashi Channel, along with intelligence sharing on PLA Navy movements. Taiwan has even sent military observers to U.S.-Philippines drills in Batanes, an unprecedented move that illustrates increasing coordination without triggering formal recognition issues. In practice, both sides understand that their security is intertwined, even if diplomacy requires subtlety. Mavulus has evolved from a neglected northern outpost into a central symbol of Philippine sovereignty. Its value is as much psychological as military. It demonstrates that Manila is willing to defend even its smallest frontier in the face of external pressure. Future plans include developing modest civilian infrastructure, such as ports, to enhance logistics and humanitarian response. This would not only improve the living conditions of the troops stationed there, but also anchor Mavulus as a permanent, functioning node of Philippine presence in the Luzon Strait. In essence, Mavulus Island may be tiny, but it carries weight far beyond its shores. It represents the Philippines' northernmost claim, the first line of defense in a Taiwan conflict, and a crucial piece of terrain in great power competition between the US and China. Its handful of stationed troops endure hardship not just as guardians of a lonely island, but as living symbols of sovereignty. As tensions grow in both the West Philippine Sea and the Taiwan Strait, Mavulus stands at the crossroads of Manila's fate, its future inseparably tied to the trajectory of great power rivalry in the Indo-Pacific. If you liked the video, do not forget to like, share, and subscribe our channel for deep analysis of contemporary issues. How could a piece of land smaller than a city park drag 2 treaty allies and a rising superpower into constant strategic calculation? That question defines Thitu Island, known in the Philippines as Pagasa. At just 37 hectares, with a short runway and a small civilian community, it should barely register on a map. Instead, it has become one of the most closely watched places in the South China Sea. Chinese Coast Guard ships now routinely press in close, using water cannons, blocking maneuvers, and ramming tactics, incidents that spark protests not only from Manila, but increasingly from Washington. What makes Thitu matter is not its size, but its people. Unlike artificial reefs elsewhere in the Spratlys,
Thitu is home to families, teachers, fishermen, children, living under a national flag. That human presence changes everything. Harassing an empty reef is one thing. Doing so within sight of homes and a working airstrip is another. For the U.S.-Philippines alliance, credibility is no longer tested on abstract lines at sea, but in the safety of civilians under Allied administration. In this way, Thitu resembles Japan's remote islands near China, or Taiwan's offshore holdings, small, exposed, and symbolically heavy. These places show how presence, not firepower, anchors deterrence. Thitu fits that pattern, except it sits in a region where gray zone pressure is being normalized as everyday governance. That is why Thitu now weighs so heavily on alliance planning. It forces uncomfortable questions. How much pressure is too much? How to deter without escalation? And how to protect